Are most or all of your tomatoes still green? Ever wonder why they're not ripening? So let's talk about some of the most common reasons why your tomatoes might not be ripening. Stick around until the end, and I bet you'll walk away with a pretty good idea of what's going on and also how to fix it. And the last reason is probably the most overlooked of them all. The first reason your tomatoes aren't ripening? Temperature. For many of us, this summer has been an absolute scorcher. Here in my 5B garden, I just had 3 straight weeks of highs above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 29 degrees Celsius. And it turns out, that's just too darn hot for tomatoes. And just because tomatoes are a summer crop, it doesn't mean that they can withstand a constant barrage of heat. Have you ever noticed a drop-off in flower production when temps have been elevated? Or maybe you're getting flowers, but no fruit? Tomatoes grow best when temperatures are between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. As temperatures fall or rise outside that range, production slows down. And if you're seeing consistent daytime temperatures over 85 degrees Fahrenheit, or 29 degrees Celsius, your tomato plants are unlikely to set fruit. It also means that any fruit that's already on your plants is likely to stop ripening. And this is because at those high temperatures, the 2 organic compounds responsible for the pigmentation of ripe tomatoes, lycopene and carotene, cannot be produced. So your tomatoes end up sitting in what's called the mature green stage until those compounds can get back into action. And other than just waiting for things to cool off, there are a couple things that you can do to kickstart your tomatoes back into ripening. First, you can use shade cloth. Think about it, it's cooler in the shade. And shielding your tomato plants with shade cloth can actually decrease the plant's temperature by up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, or 5.5 degrees Celsius, which should help the fruit to ripen. And if you have any fruits that have reached the mature green stage, you could always just pick them and bring them indoors to help them ripen. Once they reach the mature green stage, tomatoes are no longer growing. They've achieved their final size and now they're focused on ripening. But if it's too hot outside, you can always pick them, bring them indoors, and help them ripen inside. Just pop them into a paper bag and leave them on the counter. The more favorable temperature in your kitchen, combined with the ethylene gas tomatoes produce, will help to ripen up your fruit in about 5 days. Even faster if you pick a tomato that already has a little bit of blush to it. Also be aware as the season progresses that too low of a temperature can also have an adverse effect on the ripening of your tomatoes. Anything below 65 degrees Fahrenheit or around 18 degrees Celsius, and you'll notice fewer flowers being produced and the ripening is going to slow down quite a bit. Another reason your tomatoes aren't ripening is nutrition. What are you feeding your plants and how are they looking? Does your tomato patch look more like a tomato forest? At this time of year, we want to be focused on growing fruit, not leaves. Leaves are necessary for photosynthesis, but it is possible to grow too many leaves, which can inhibit both fruit production and the ripening of already existing fruit. If you're fertilizing mid-season, make sure you're feeding your plants something that's low in nitrogen, but high in phosphorus and potassium. Early in the season, a high nitrogen fertilizer is great. It helps get the plant established and it gets it nice and bushy with lots of leaves. But come mid-season, we want the plants to focus on things like flower development, which is what phosphorus promotes, and the development of healthy fruit, which is where potassium comes in. Even once fruit is set, if the nitrogen levels are too high, your plants are going to focus on growing more leaves, instead of pushing that energy into the fruit to help it develop and ultimately ripen. To diagnose the issue, take a good look at your plants. Are they lush and super bushy, but with very few flowers or fruit clusters? Are the leaves a really dark green? Have you noticed flowers starting to form and then dropping off the plants without setting fruit? What about existing fruit? Have you had any issues with conditions like blossom end rot? Maybe consider testing your soil to find out the levels of NPK. If you find that there's an abundance of nitrogen in your soil, you may want to feed your plants something that's going to help stimulate flower and fruit production. Now, even if your soil's nutrition isn't an issue, it's still possible to have too much of a good thing. Now, we know that leaves are absolutely crucial to the overall health of a plant. They absorb the sun's rays and convert that into carbohydrates, energy to help the plants grow. But really, sometimes enough is enough. And this is the next reason why your tomatoes aren't ripening. There's a such thing as too many leaves. The more leaves your tomato plants grow, the more energy they're expending on account of those leaves. And while large, lush tomato plants can absolutely be beautiful in the garden, at the end of the day, you're not eating the leaves. You're eating the fruit. And it's possible that your tomatoes aren't growing or ripening because your plant has too many leaves. And I'm here to tell you it's okay to remove some, or maybe even a lot, of the leaves. In my years of gardening, I've come across very few topics that are more contentious than the topic of tomato pruning. Tomatoes, for very good reason, are one of the most popular veg grown in the home garden. But with that comes a lot of very firm stances on what you should and should not do when caring for your tomato plants. Well, here goes. If you want to grow more tomatoes, you have to grow fewer leaves. And you can achieve this by actively removing leaves from the plant as they grow. Everything on a tomato plant uses energy. And the fewer leaves on the plant, the less energy will be used toward growing those leaves, and more energy toward developing your fruit. Now there's a caveat. You don't want to go too far. Remember, leaves are what absorb energy from the sun in order to help grow your tomato plants. So yes, leaves are necessary, but you absolutely can afford to remove a decent bit of the leaves from your plant, especially on the bottom half. When I'm out in my garden, I always carry my pruning shears, and I make it a habit to remove any leaves on my tomato plants that are below the lowest fruit cluster. Notice what they don't have on basically their entire bottom halves? That's right, leaves. I've snipped them all. They're unnecessary, and there's still plenty of foliage at the top of the plants. By pruning the bottom leaves, I've opened up room for airflow, which will help keep my plants healthy. I've eliminated unnecessary drains on the plant, and I've opened up room underneath to plant more veg that will benefit from the shade provided by my tomato vines. So go ahead, prune your tomatoes. It could be the key to growing more fruit and getting that fruit to ripen. Another reason your tomatoes might not be ripening is due to pests and disease. There are plenty of outside influences that can absolutely wreak havoc on your tomato plants if they're not caught and addressed. The tomato and tobacco hornworms are the larval stages of the five-spotted hawk moth and the sphinx moth, respectively. And a single caterpillar left to its own devices can absolutely destroy a tomato plant. Defoliation, fruit destruction, and weakened plants caused by hornworms are all reasons why your tomatoes might not be ripening. Hornworms can also serve to pass diseases from one plant to another. Control these little guys by hand-picking them and crushing them or dropping them into a bucket of soapy water. Or if you're like me, just cut the stem off that they're munching on and relocate it to a different part of the garden. Or you could even have a sacrificial plant, another tomato or a different type of nightshade that you can relocate them to. But if you find any hornworms that have what look like little grains of white rice sticking out of their backs, leave them. These caterpillars have been caught by a parasitic wasp, a beneficial insect in your garden that you want to keep around. Diseases like Fusarium wilt will not only keep fruit from developing and ripening, but will also necessitate removal and destruction of the infected plants. No composting them, as well as the need for crop rotation for up to a few years in order to ensure that the soil-borne pathogen is gone before planting more tomatoes in that spot. Get to know the signs, and also maybe consider buying varieties of tomatoes that are resistant to these diseases. And finally, probably the most common reason why your tomatoes aren't ripening: impatience. It's okay, I'm guilty of it too. Gardening requires a lot of waiting. And when we've grown these plants from seed in the winter, hardened them off, transplanted them into the garden, given them light and water and food, the least they could do is reward us by feeding us dozens and dozens of tomatoes. And now, but it takes time. Some tomato varieties take as long as 100 days from transplant to harvest. That's a lot of waiting, but it's worth it. It's why we do what we do. But also, if it feels like too long of a time to wait, that's okay. You can find earlier season varieties that mature in 60 to 70 days. And for some of us, where our growing season barely cracks 100 days, it's an absolute must for us to grow early season varieties in our gardens. So check the weather. Consider what it is you're feeding your plants. You have my permission to prune. Fight the good fight against pests and disease. But most of all, enjoy yourself. Take a deep breath and have patience with your garden. If you treat it well, it'll be feeding you in no time. Happy growing.